Well, our new book is The Night Bus Hero, and it's by Anjali Ralph, and that is the same author that wrote Boy in the Back of the Class and Star Outside My Window, if you've read or enjoyed either of those. This book covers issues concerning bullying and also homelessness, and it's a really clever book. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 1, Two Snakes and the School Soup is the title. Hector! Stop! Right there! I froze with my hand hovering above the large vat of bright red tomato soup. It would have been a perfectly ordinary pot of soup if it hadn't been for the long, bright green rubber snake that was now floating right around in the middle of it. Hector! I'm warning you! I slowly turned to look over my shoulder. I could see all the dinner ladies in their bright blue uniforms staring at me with their mouths wide open, like doors someone had forgotten to shut. Everyone in the dinner hall had frozen, except Mr. Lancaster. His mouth was open wide too, and getting wider like a big black hole. I could tell he was getting ready to explode because his face had gone as pink as a baboon's bottom and his nose was starting to twitch. Don't you dare, he hissed, glaring at the second rubber snake that I was holding in my hand. I looked down at the second red rubber snake. This one was almost bright red, almost as bright red as the boring soup Mrs. Baxter had made. I knew I had two options. The first one was to not drop the second snake in. I'd still get punished for the green snake, but maybe it wouldn't be quite as bad. The second option was to drop the snake in. That would make Mr. Lancaster even madder than he already was, and it would make Mrs. Baxter really mad. But it would serve her right for being the worst dinner lady we'd ever had, always narrowing her eyes and giving us the smallest spoonfuls of the things we wanted and plonking giant spoonfuls of the things we hated on our plates. It was about time someone got her back. Plus, it would make Will and Katie really laugh. They're my best friends. Well, said Mr. Lancaster. Looking back at Mr. Lancaster, I grinned and let go of the snake. A gasp echoed around the dinner hall as the second rubber snake joined the first with a splash. Blobs of tomato soup flew out everywhere. A splodge landed with a splat on Mrs. Baxter's head. A second lump hit with a slop on another dinner lady's cheek, and a third struck with a gloop on Mr. Lancaster's twitchy nose and oozed down to the floor with a drip, drip, drip. Right, young man, you've done it now. Come with me. That's a thing people call me when they get really angry. Young man. It's as if they're so mad they can't even remember my name. In fact, no one ever says my name normally anymore. It's either young man or Hector, shouted in a voice which tells me right away that the person's angry with me. Even Will and Katie just call me H. I don't care. I'm used to it, and I don't anymore. Most people are so stupid that it doesn't matter what they think of me. They're like those tiny annoying flies that buzz around you when you're trying to have an ice cream. The worst part is the stupidest, most annoying bugs in the country all seem to be at my school. I imagine what it might be like to swat people with a giant fly swatter as Mr. Lancaster started to march me out of the dinner hall. I gave Will and Katie a wink on my way out. After all, I had won the bet. But they were laughing so hard I don't think they even saw me. Sit right there and don't you dare say a word, snapped Mr. Lancaster, pointing at the detention sofa. Now, Mr. Lancaster is the head teacher, and sometimes I wonder if the certificates on his wall are really secret awards given to him for being the stupidest and most annoying head teacher in the whole country. The funny thing is, he thinks he's clever. He's always watching me and waiting to catch me out, just so that he can cry, Hector, in front of the whole school. And when he does that, the veins in his neck go from being two-dimensional to three-dimensional. He's always giving me weird warnings too. Like last week it was, One more time and you'll be out on your ear. So quick your head'll be spinning like the solar system. Today he decided with a, "You're this close to getting your legs chopped right off from under you, young man. And then what will you be? Legolas, that's what." If Mr. Lancaster really wants to get rid of me, or my legs, he'll have to do a better job of catching me. He got lucky today, because I guess he must have been spying on me extra hard. But he doesn't know the half of what I get up to, because I can see his stupid traps from miles away. Like the time he installed tiny cameras that looked like shiny black beetles outside the boys' toilets. He was hoping to catch me taking payment from those who didn't want their hair washed in the toilets at lunchtime. But of course, I saw the cameras right away. Now I wave to them every day as I walk past, before taking all my payments in the far corner of the playground. Works out well for everyone. No one gets a toilet dunking, and I get a steady supply of other people's pocket money and sweets. Then there was the time last year when Mr. Lancaster made all the school prefects into lunch monitors, and he gave them huge shiny badges. Their job was to try and stop me from tripping people up when they were carrying their lunch trays to their tables. But I just tripped the lunch monitors up instead, and they all quit the very next day. "Hector, are you listening?" Mr. Lancaster's angry voice interrupted my happy memory of tripping Katie Lang and watching her tumble head over heels across the dining hall while her bowl of chilli splattered half of year 2. "You had better not even think about missing your detention today." Before Mr. Lancaster could continue, the school bell began to ring, as if it had already had enough of him. Trying not to grin, I nodded, and slowly, very, very slowly, I made my way back to my classroom. By the time I reached it, everyone was already inside getting out their workbooks. "Hector!" sighed Mrs. Vergara, picking up the register and shaking her head. "Why must you always be late?" she asked, scratching her head now too. I shrugged and I slumped down into my chair next to Rajesh. Mrs. Vergara is always shaking and scratching her head at me. It's as if she secretly has nits and only remembers when they itch whenever I'm in the room. Okay, now settle down everybody," she said, walking over to the whiteboard with a bright green pen in her hand. "Now that everyone is finally here, let's just recap on the events leading up to the Great Fire of London." I realised my workbook was in my drawer at the front of the classroom, and I gave a bit of a groan. Not that I really cared. I sat and I watched as Mrs. Vergara's pen made big loopy letters on the board, leaving behind like a shiny green trail, just like a slug. "Psst! Rajesh!" whispered a boy's voice from the table in front of us, where Robert and Maylie sat. A small piece of folded paper was landed near my elbow. Before Rajesh could even reach for it, I grabbed the note and I opened it up. It was a funny drawing of Mrs. Vergara with flames coming out of her bum, as if her farts had caught on fire. The words "How the Great Fire of London Really Started" were written above it. I looked over at Robert, impressed. I didn't think that a brainiac like him would have the guts to draw something so funny about a teacher. Usually any bits of paper he passed to Rajesh had maths equations on them, or said something like, "Meet me in the library by the chemistry section." And then from over his shoulder, I saw Karina nervously look at me. It was obviously her drawing that Robert had then been passing along. "Hector, something keeping you busy, is it?" I quickly scrunched the paper up into my hands. But it was too late. Mrs. Vergara was already standing in front of me. "Give it here, now," she said softly, her head tilting to one side. I looked over at Rajesh, whose eyes were popping so far out of his head they looked like they were going to fly across the room, and then glanced at Maylie and stupid Robert. Maylie was frowning at Robert, and Robert was sitting up straight and looking at the ceiling as if he hadn't done anything at all. I could see Karina doing the same thing, giving them all a scowl. I handed the drawing over to Mrs. Vergara. I knew exactly what was going to do next, because unfortunately Mr. Lancaster isn't the only champion level stupid person at my school. Mrs. Vergara is just as stupid. Except instead of trying to catch me at things, she pretends to be nice to me. That's one of the tricks extra sneaky grown-ups like to use when they want you to think that they're your friend and not your enemy. Looking down at the drawing, Mrs. Vergara shook her head in disappointment. Oh, Hector! I am disappointed in you. I know you're so much better than this. But it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was Karina. She passed it to Maylee, and Maylee and Robert, and they gave it to Rajesh. Karina gasped, and Robert shook his head. Maylee opened her mouth before she could say anything. Mrs. Vergara bent down and pointed one long finger at me. Don't blame them for your behaviour, said Mrs. Vergara. This drawing is insulting and rude enough without you lying too. I just wish you could trust me enough to tell me the truth. I'm afraid I'll have to give you detention again. I opened my mouth about to argue that it really hadn't been me, and that if it had, my drawing frankly would have been way better and funnier. But I knew there wasn't any point. Whenever a grown-up tells me to trust them, I know it's the last thing I can do. Grown-ups only ever help people they like, and I've never met a single grown-up who likes me. Besides, I've been disappointing everyone since as far back as I can remember, so that wasn't anything new. Mrs. Vergara walked back to the whiteboard and asked a question about the fire. I saw Maylee looking at me, so I gave her a scowl, which made her turn away. As bad as Mr. Lancaster and Mrs. Vergara are, there's nothing worse than brainiacs and teachers' pets, which is exactly what Maylee and Robert are. The boys are always called brainiacs and the girls are always called teachers' pets, but they're both just as annoying as each other. You can always tell right away if someone's a brainiac or a teacher's pet because they act like it's the end of the world if they don't get an A or a gold star in their tests, and they never forget their homework. In fact, some of them are so disgusting they even do extra homework. And all of them suck up to teachers so much that their lips get stuck in a pout. Just go and see. Go and find a brainiac or a teacher's pet, and you'll see that their lips are redder and poutier than everyone else's. Sadly, you probably won't have to look far, because every class in every school on the whole planet has got at least one. But I guess my class is the unluckiest class in the world, because we've got three horrible sucker-uppers in one classroom. It's a nightmare. There's Natasha, who sits right next to Mrs. Vergara's desk and jumps up and down on her chair like a giant frog whenever she knows the answer to everything. Then there's Robert, who thinks he's funny as well as clever, even though he isn't either. They're both too scared to even look at me most of the time, so they like to pretend I don't exist. But the worst, the most irritating, and the most pet-like pet of all the teachers' pets in the whole wide world is definitely Maylee. She joined our class last year, and even though she doesn't speak like the rest of us and brings smelly food for lunch in black plastic, like bright orange noodles and weird ball things, all the teachers seem to love her. She has shiny black hair that's always up in a ponytail, which she flicks around whenever she gets something right. She's always chewing the end of her pencil, which makes her look like a giraffe eating straw. She never gets anything less than 95% on every single test, and she holds the record for having the most awards of anything that my stupid school gives awards for, even though she's only new. She'd probably get an award for breathing if it existed. I hate her more than anyone I have ever met. After class, I head straight to detention, and I sit in my usual chair in the corner of the room. I was the only one at detention. Again. Glad to see you've made it on time for once, said Mr. Lancaster as he placed a handful of blank sheets in front of me. Detention with Mr. Lancaster is as boring as watching paint dry. I know, because one time that's exactly what he made me do. He'd maybe sit by a school wall that had been painted and wait for it to dry. But usually he just makes me sit and write out lines, like today. I think Mr. Lancaster hopes that if he makes detentions boring enough, I won't ever want to do another one. But what he doesn't actually understand is that I really don't mind detentions. My brain calms down and my ears close up and my eyes stop blinking, and instead of seeing the room I'm in or the words I'm writing, I start to see brand new ways of getting back at everyone. Some of my best, most brilliant ideas have come from sitting in detention. Now, this detention made me realise that I needed to do something different, something big. I needed to go outside the box Mrs. Verger was always talking about, the one inside your head that makes you do the same thing again and again. I needed to try something new, something that would really get everyone talking about me, and which would be 100 times better than putting just snakes in school soup. I was just thinking about what that big something could be and writing out, "I will not put snakes in the school soup" for the 50th time, when there was a knock on the door, and Mrs. Verger's head and shoulders appeared. Mr. Lancaster, do you mind if I just speak to you outside for a moment?" "No, of course," said Mr. Lancaster, springing out of his chair, giving me a look that warned me not to try anything. He followed Mrs. Verger out and shut the door behind him. Jumping up, I tiptoed over the door to have a little listen. Mrs. Verger was probably telling Mr. Lancaster all about the stupid drawing to get me into even more trouble. Pressing my ear hard against the keyhole, I could just make out their voices. "See here," Mrs. Verger was saying, a noise that sounded like large pieces of paper being rustled, followed by her voice. "He is the only one in the whole year group, possibly the whole school, to be submitting drawings in this kind of comic book manga style. For him to create the whole character and a storyline for what was quite a simple project on identity really is quite extraordinary. I think if we entered him, he might have a chance of winning." There were more sounds of paper before Mr. Lancaster said, "Yes, these are quite something. He's always been rather good at drawing." I put my eye to the keyhole, but all I could see was Mrs. Verger's bright blue jeans. "It's just a shame he's so badly behaved," continued Mr. Lancaster. "The boy's an absolute menace. Snakes in the school soup one minute, beating up the year twos the next. In fact, he's probably destroying that classroom as we speak. Imagine if we entered him for a National Art Award. It would never do. He'd ruin the school's reputation. Well, what's left of it." I pushed my ear even closer to the keyhole. I couldn't believe that they were talking about me and my drawings. "I was thinking," Mrs. Verger said, "what if we told him that we wanted to put him forward, but that we can only do it if he starts behaving, maybe? It might settle him down. His drawings are already so unique, really extraordinary. It might give him some focus, a reason to engage in his lessons." The rustling of papers stopped. "No," said Mr. Lancaster. "No, Mrs. Verger, the boy is a lost cause. He'd probably sabotage the whole thing and get our school banned from the competition. Bad enough we have to put up with him. No reason to force him onto an awards committee and other innocent students." "I suppose you're right," says Mrs. Verger. "It's a shame. It's such a waste of a talent, but yes, I suppose you're right." The door handle was suddenly being pushed down. Sprinting back to my corner, I jumped into the seat and I grabbed my pencil just as Mr. Lancaster came back in. He looked at me and then slowly walked around the room as if he was making sure it wasn't on fire. "Come on, Hector, get on with it. We've both got homes to get back to," he said, seeing that I still had at least 50 more lines to have to write. I forced my hand to write as quickly as it could, even though it was shaking and my words were coming out wonky. My face was burning, and with every line I wrote, I thought harder and harder about what I could do next that would be bigger and worse than anything I'd done before. Something to show Mr. Lancaster and Miss Vergerer and everyone else too just how much of a menace I really could be. Chapter 2. The Trolley Man. I can't believe you got caught by Mr. Lancaster and Mrs. Baxter, said Katie. She was waiting with Will in the playground for me, just like they always did when I had detention. They're so old. You need to be way quicker, H. You're getting slow. I looked at the floor. I could feel my face going red. Whenever they think I've messed up, Will and Katie never stop talking about it. Sometimes I'll give them a punch, but I knew this time Katie was right. I should have been faster with the snakes. Come on, let's go and have some fun with the year threes, said Will, trying to cheer me up. Look, there's Felix. If we're lucky, he might even wet himself a bit. Will gave me a little wink. He's always suggesting we do things that will make everyone more scared of us. Will's been my friend since the day we started school together. I saw him flicking bits of rubber at everyone and then lying about it, and I knew right away that he'd be great fun to team up with. Will's like me, well, kind of. He's a bit of a coward and he does lie a lot, whereas I don't bother lying. Not ever. Mainly because it's more fun to see grown-ups' faces when you shock them by telling them the truth. Will's okay though, he's funny, and he's always helping me spot teachers' pets and brainiacs and show-offs and anyone who has more money than is healthy for them. He's bigger and taller than me, so when we walk around together, everyone knows it's us right away. His hair is like bright yellow and it's straight and it sticks up like straw like a scarecrow's head. It makes me look a bit like a mad scientist. It makes him look like a mad scientist, sorry. My straight brown hair just flops over my face, halfway over my eyes, as if it's almost too lazy to do anything. So I don't look like mad anything. Go on, urged Katie, poking me with her elbow, pointing at Felix and his group of tiny friends. I dare ya. I glanced round at Mrs. Simpson, who was standing by the gates just 10 steps away from us, talking to some parents. It's always tricky beating someone up at home time. If a parent catches you, even Mr. Lancaster gets into trouble, and that means getting detention until he retires. I looked at Katie. She was challenging me with one of her eyebrows. Katie loves challenging people with her eyebrows. She joined our school last year after she got expelled from another school, and me and Will knew right away that she was one of us. We became friends the moment I saw her using her eyebrows to tell Maylie and Robert that she was going to chase them into the next town if they came near her. Katie's super tall and a super fast runner, so she could probably do it if she wanted to. She has the palest skin I've ever seen on anyone, though, and straight brown hair that looks as if it's been ironed, with large square glasses on her face. Normally, anyone who wears glasses is usually a teacher's pet or a brainiac. But Katie's different. Go on, what are you waiting for? Katie whispered. You are getting slow. That did it. I gave her a scowl and immediately I began walking towards my target. But at the exact same moment I reached him, Mrs. Simpson turned round. Her eyes fell on me right away, so I had to run past Felix and straight out to the gates to make her think I was late for something. Oh man, you waited too long, growled Will a moment later as he and Katie joined me. We walked in silence past the sweet shop on the corner of the street and headed towards the big double road that led to the park gates. I kicked at some pebbles by my feet. I wanted to kick something bigger and harder. What's wrong with him? Whispered Will loudly. I don't know, said Katie, only half whispering. He's probably just sore because he's too slow and he keeps getting caught. I darted across the road between beeping cars and I entered the park, heading up the grey pathway towards the hill where all the biggest oak trees were. Will and Katie were still talking to each other about me. When they really want to get on my nerves, they pretend to be whispering to each other without really whispering at all. What a sore loser, fake whispered Will. Yeah, right, fake whispered Katie. You'd think it was our fault that he's not fast enough anymore. My hand rolled up into fists and the top of my head felt like it was as hot as a barbecue with fresh lit coals in it. I wanted to turn round and push Will and Katie as hard as I could so that they wouldn't dare say any of the things they were saying ever again. We reached the top of the hill where an old bench stood beneath the oak trees. And that's when I spotted him. The old man. I'd seen him there before, lots of times, sitting on the bench next to a trolley piled high with rubbish. He was in his usual long, old, crumply black coat that looked as if it had been pulled out of a bin, and he was wearing a bright yellow woolly hat that he always seemed to have on his head, even in the summer. And without even trying, I had the most genius idea that had ever been born. In fact, it was so genius and so out of the box and unexpected that I knew it would be enough to make Will and Katie shut up once and for all. I stopped walking, which made Will and Katie automatically stop too. Will looked at me blankly, but Katie's eyebrows immediately jumped up as if to say, "Yeah? And what?" "Do you want to have some fun?" I asked. Will nodded, a smile breaking across his face, making him look like a hungry fox that had sniffed a chicken coop up ahead. "See that old man over there?" I said, pointing towards the bench. "What, you mean the old trolley man?" said Katie. "Yeah, we're going to let him know he's not allowed here any more." "How?" whispered Katie, leaning in towards me. She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose. I waited for a few seconds to keep them guessing, and then I whispered back, "I'm going to take his hat." "His hat?" asked Will. "Yeah, he's always wearing that gross, stinky hat." Katie finally smiled, which meant that she thought my idea was cool. "Come on," I said, "let's go." When we reached the bench, we could see the old man had fallen asleep. His black, grey, fluffy beard was acting like a pillow for his chin as it rested on his chest. His dirty wool hat was falling to one side like a Santa Claus hat, except it was yellow, not red. He was breathing heavily through his pink-tipped nose, while his half-gloved fingers moved every few seconds, as if they were playing a tune to a song that no one else could hear. "He's asleep," whispered Will, as we all stood in front of him. "No way, genius," said Katie, rolling her eyeballs. "What now?" she asked, looking at me. I put my fingers to my lips and then tiptoed my way around the bench and went to stand behind the man. Reaching out, I hovered my hand over his head, ready to grab it and run. Will and Katie stared at me. Will's mouth was open and Katie's eyes were shining like two pools of water that had just been lit by sunlight. In less time than it took them to blink, I snatched the yellow hat from the old man's head and I turned ready to run. But before I could even take a step, a large hand with dirty fingernails grabbed my shoulder. "And what do you think you're doing?" shouted the man, leaping to his feet and pulling me back. Quickly, I threw the hat in Will's direction. It worked. The old man let go of me and ran towards it, but Will was too fast and he caught it. "Do you want this, trolley man?" Will said as he held the hat out. The old man reached for it, but at the last second, Will threw the hat back to me, laughing. In a flash, I threw it to Katie, and Katie threw it back to Will, and the old man spun around and around, not sure which of us to try and catch first. Then suddenly he stopped, and he looked straight at me. I looked straight back into his small brown eyes, surrounded by wrinkles. "You," he said, pointing a finger at me. "You give it back." I grinned. "Yeah, make me." I began spinning the hat round on the tip of my finger like a woolly yellow basketball. For a few seconds, all he did was stare at me. Then, swift as lightning, he crouched to the ground and, jumping back up, flicked his wrist towards me with a quick chopping motion. Something hard stung my face. "Ow! Ow!" cried Will. "Oi, stop that!" yelled Katie, as they both started to back away. I felt a sting of pain on my leg, and then my face again. Something hard hit my palm. Closing my hand around a small sharp object, I understood what was happening. The old man was throwing tiny stones at us. "Off with ya!" he said angrily, as his hands magically produced more and more of these tiny stone bullets, "or I'll have your guts for garters." Will and Katie began to run back down the hill under a shower of pebbles, yelping in pain as they went. I tried to stand my ground, clutching the hat. "Come on then," said the old man. He started to laugh as the little stones flew at me quicker than before, and before I knew it, I had dropped the hat. He started walking towards me, and I quickly realised there was nothing I could do. He was too big to fight on my own, and he was armed too. "I'll be back," I shouted, feeling hot and angry and red as I ran down the hill to where Katie and Will were watching. "Yeah, and I'll be waiting for you, you little scum," the old man shouted back as a large stone hit me on the back of my leg. It wasn't until I reached Katie and Will that I noticed a crowd had gathered. Dog walkers. They were watching us with their mouths open or frowns on their faces, and their dogs were staring at us too. "Come on, let's get out of here," I cried, walking quickly towards the park gates. Will and Katie followed me out, bowing their heads down low so no one could see their faces properly. I didn't bow my head low like I should have done, because I could hear Will sniggering and I could see Katie starting to giggle too, and I knew they were laughing at me again. "What are you laughing at?" I asked, feeling my face burn. "He got you good," said Will, "even though he's super old." "Yeah," said Katie, "and homeless. Talk about embarrassing." "I'm going to get him back," I said, as we hurried out the park gates. "You'll see." "Yeah? How?" asked Katie, challenging me with her eyebrows again. I didn't know, not yet. Now, at the park gates, Katie and Will turned left onto their road, which would lead them to their homes. I could hear them still giggling and sniggering as they disappeared into the distance. Once they were gone, I looked back over my shoulder and through the railings to the top of the hill. I could see the old man with his yellow hat back on his head, walking away with his trolley as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just embarrassed me in front of my friends. I made a silent promise to him right then and there. I would get him back for what he did, and I would get him back so good that not even stone bullets would be able to stop me. The Theft of Platform 1. Chapter 3. When I get home after a really bad day, all I want to do is be left alone with my computer games. But that afternoon, I couldn't seem to catch a single break, because as soon as I walked in through the door, before I'd even done a single thing, I started to get shouted at like a criminal. "Hector, are you home? Why are you so late, huh?" "I don't know," I shouted back, slamming the front door behind me. I kicked off my shoe and was just about to run up to my room when the voice added, "Your brother's made you something. Come and see, huh?" I didn't want to. I wanted to go and start plotting revenge on the old man in the park, but I knew if I didn't go through to the kitchen to see what Lisa was shouting about, she'd probably follow me upstairs. Now, Lisa, she's my little brother's nanny, but is always telling me off too. It's like having an annoying teacher in the house. Her real name is Lestari, but we all call her Lisa because that's what Hercules calls her. I try and keep out of her way as much as possible. At home, I try and keep out of everyone's way as much as possible. It's just easier. "What?" I asked, pushing open the kitchen door. Lisa and my sister Helen were standing by the kitchen counter in front of a massive plate of cheese toasties. My little brother was sitting on his stool, painting, with glitter. Again. Now, my brother's name is Hercules, which just frankly makes me feel really sorry for him, because I just know he's going to get beaten up at school with that sort of a name. I mean, who wouldn't want to beat up a kid called Hercules? It's a stupid name, especially for a 4-year-old whose only talent is really leaving a trail of glitter wherever he goes. That includes the cereal boxes and a toilet. The problem is, Mum and Dad are fans of old stories about Greeks and Romans and all the useless things they got up to, so they decided to punish us, their very own kids, with names from their favourite legends. Hercules and me, we're named after heroes, and my sister, Helen, is named after a Greek woman who had a face so beautiful apparently she started a war. The only thing my sister could start with her pimply face is a car crash. She's definitely not the most beautiful woman anywhere, not even in a room she's in by herself. Now, Hercules was a famous warrior, and he probably never stuck Lego up his nose or spent his time licking people's hands. And I'm never going to be a hero, even if I am called Hector. So you could say we're all doomed from birth, really. "Look, Hector, look!" Hercules cried, holding up a rubbish picture. I didn't even know what it was meant to be. "What is it?" I asked, wondering when he'd start to actually say my name properly. He made my name sound like a burp. It's you, explained Lisa, as if it was a fantastic surprise. It's brilliant, isn't it? I looked down at Hercules with his brown curls and his chubby little cheeks and large brown eyes, and wondered how he could be so happy all the time. It was strange, he never cried, not even when I pushed him away, when he's been annoying and he falls on his bum. Instead of snivelling or telling on me, he always looks at me as if he's trying to remember what happened. Then he just jumps straight back up. Why are your trousers dirty? Asked Helen, looking at me with her eyes narrowed and scratching at an extra pink pimple. Did you get into another fight? Helen's 13 years old. That means she's only 3 years older than me. But she still tries to boss me around all the time. She acts like she's mum, so I remind her that she isn't, and that because she isn't, she can't even make me do anything. Usually, all I have to do is call her Pimple Face, so she gets upset enough to leave me alone, or Dumbo, because she's got extra large ears. She's a famous teacher's pet at her secondary school, so Mum and Dad are always asking me why I can't be more like her. But I'd rather drink a big jug of slime than ever be like her, and she knows it. Looking down at my trouser legs, I realised that the stones the old man had thrown at me had left puffs of white dirt everywhere. I quickly tried to brush away the marks. Lisa, look! Oh no, Lisa, look at his trousers. They're all messed up. He was definitely in a fight. Oh, shut up, I snapped, brushing harder. Lisa bent down and grabbed a trouser leg, inspecting it closely like a detective who'd lost their glasses. I pulled my leg away from her. She's right, said Lisa, shaking her head and tutting. Hector, you were in another fight? What will your mum and dad say, huh? I scowled, wondering if this day could get any worse. Well, they won't find out, I muttered. The best thing about my family is that Mum and Dad are never around. They're always working or going to parties filled with people who think they're clever or saving the world by eating millions of canapes. Tiny food, you need at least 100 of them to fill you up. Mum works for a charity that tries to help the environment, so she's always on the news trying to get famous people to do things. One time she actually met the King of Norway and got some of his army to dress up as giant bees to show everyone how important bees were to the planet. And another time she went on a march with some famous singers to save a forest or something, and they all got arrested. Super embarrassing, so I pretend that she doesn't do any of those things, even though I'm pretty sure everyone at my school knows. Dad, he makes documentaries on the telly about what he says are all the souls the world has forgotten. He follows people running away from gangs or being kicked out of their homes by the government and tells their stories, so he's always travelling too. Last week he went to San Francisco for his latest film, and this week he's off in Amsterdam while Mum was somewhere in Scotland trying to turn a castle into a butterfly farm or something. Until a few years ago they used to take us with them when they went to work, somewhere nice. But after I nearly set a hotel room on fire one time, by accident, they never took us anywhere again. Even when they are home, they're so busy, they hardly ever notice us. Last year, they were working in another country on Christmas Day, and they even forgot to ring me up. Then they felt so guilty that when they got back, they gave me all the games I could ever ask for. Helen got a new laptop she wanted for school, and Hercules got so much glitter he could have painted at least 3 houses with it. So, instead of having Mum and Dad at home, we've got Lisa. And as long as I could make her and Helen forget about the fight, then Mum and Dad would never know. Just then, the small TV on the kitchen counter started playing an advert with my sister's favourite pop song in it. Helen ran over to watch, and Hercules began licking Lisa's hands as if it was a brand new lollipop, which made her immediately start to fuss over him. I grinned, knowing I was safe from Mum and Dad finding anything about my trousers. My stomach gave me a kick, as if to remind me I was hungry. I grabbed all the cheese toasties Lisa had made, and I went to the fridge to get a drink. Gaming was always better with toasties and a big glass of something fizzy. Hercules, you are our little Van Gogh, aren't you, eh? Said Lisa, giving Hercules a big kiss on top of his head as he scribbled away furiously, making another picture that didn't look like anything that existed in the real world. Hope not, I snorted, or he'll end up dying penniless. Don't listen to him, Hercules, said Lisa, as Hercules frowned. You finish your drawing while Auntie Lisa gets a packed lunch sorted for your sister's big trip tomorrow, huh? I don't need a packed lunch for tomorrow anymore, Lisa, said Helen, turning back on the TV. Our book trial's been cancelled. What's a book tale? Oh, book trail's been cancelled. What's a book tale? Asked Hercules, making glitter circles with his finger over my portrait. No, not a book tale, said Helen, a book trail. It's when you go to places that famous authors wrote about and you learn all about them and you mark down on a special map so you might get a prize. I want prizes, announced Hercules. Yeah, I want them too, said Helen, but we can't go now because of the robbery. What robbery? Asked Lisa, as I grabbed a can of my favourite drink and pulled open the freezer drawer to see if there was any ice cream. Didn't you see on the news? Some thieves have stolen Paddington Bear last night, right from the platform at Paddington Station. And that was supposed to be our first stop tomorrow. No, they can't have taken Paddington Bear, gasped Lisa, looking as shocked as if she'd made the statue herself. Helen nodded and spun around on her stool. Yup, Mr. Wilson said the thieves even took the green plaque that told everyone all about the man that wrote Paddington Bear, and the Platform 1 sign too. And apparently he painted some secret symbols all over the wall in its place. Symbols? Asked Lisa. Yeah, some sort of secret symbol that apparently homeless people use. None of the cameras caught the thief. Kevis's dad's a police officer, so he knows all about it, and he said it'll probably get sold underground for millions of pounds because there are only 3 statues of Paddington in the whole world, and that was one of them. The police think other statues might get stolen too, so the book trail is cancelled for now. We can't even go and see Harry Potter trolley at King's Cross. Oh, well, that's just silly, said Lisa, as she tried to stop Hercules from sticking 3 pens up his nose. Who would steal half a trolley anyway? No one would ever use it for anything. Hey, Hercules, she added, giving him a wink. Helen shrugged. She was about to say something else, but on reaching out for a toastie, noticed that they were all gone. I quickly headed towards the kitchen door with my arms full of everything I wanted. Lisa, he's just taken all of the toasties, whined Helen. Hector, I made enough for everyone. Give 2 back, please. Moving fast, I licked all the toasties. Ugh, why do you have to be so gross? Cried Helen as Hercules giggled. I licked them again, which made him giggle even more. Helen's face screwed up like a squashed mess of pimples. I grinned and waited. A few more seconds, she'd blow, just like a burst pipe. Lisa sped over to the bread tin and cried, I'm making some new ones right now. With all your favourites, Helen. Don't worry about him. Laughing, I kicked open the kitchen door and I ran upstairs. Closing my bedroom door and switching on my computer, I gulped down a whole toastie as the screen came alive. I couldn't wait to begin invading a whole new universe. The Conquering Heroes series was definitely one of the best games that had ever been invented. Getting to conquer other people's lands and weapons and universes, trying to overrule them and keep control is hard and fun all at the same time. And the battles are like the most wicked I've ever played because there are so many different universes with so many different types of enemies in them. I'm only 4 major takeovers away from completing the last level of Universe 4 and becoming champion ruler. No one at school's achieved that level yet, not even an upper school. As I waited for the game to load, I thought about what Helen had said about the thief who'd managed to steal a whole statue without being seen by anyone, and the joke Lisa had made about the half trolley at King's Cross. And then, just as my computer screen flashed to life, it came to me. I knew exactly how I was going to get my revenge on that old man in the park. The thief had given me a brilliant idea. I would make something disappear without anyone even knowing it was me, just like he had. After all, if I was a menace like Mr. Lancaster said I was, I might as well be the best menace that there could possibly be.